Hi everyone, this is Christine, and I will be speaking about the New Deal unemployment policies. To understand the New Deal, we need to go back and understand what happened to create the Great Depression. The Great Depression started on Black Thursday, October 24th, 1929. The stock market crashed when speculators began to sell off their shares, resulting in stock prices decreasing by 24% in less than a week. Banks across the nation were heavily invested in the market, so when the market crashed, banks were forced either into default directly or default by undermining people's confidence in the security of their deposits. The defaults caused banks to recall loans and limit credit, which caused a contraction in the money supply. This, in turn, caused a decline in demand for goods and services, which depressed prices and led to an increase in unemployment. Now, unemployment in the 1930s is widely explained through a macroeconomic phenomenon called cyclical or deficient demand unemployment. This phenomenon, broadly defined, means there is not enough fiscal or monetary demand in the economy for it to operate at full employment levels. While this type of employment was pervasive in the 1930s, there was another type of unemployment that arguably led to more hardship during the Great Depression, and that was structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is a mismatch between job vacancies and job seekers. Structural unemployment becomes dangerous when a person cannot find work for extended periods of time. When a person is structurally unemployed for years, their employment is what we call hardcore unemployment. When someone has been hardcore unemployed, employers are less likely to hire them for any wage and for any reason, as they tend to distrust the applicant's qualifications. Hardcore unemployment is perhaps the most difficult type of unemployment to combat because it relies on a number of biases. The type of employment that a person has, i.e. what sector they are in, is a big factor in whether or not a person would have employment. For example, construction workers had a rate of unemployment of 47.1%, and that was just for the skilled workers. If you were unskilled, it was a rate of 58%. In contrast, public service workers saw the smallest rate of unemployment with just 6.2% of men out of work. Jobs were difficult to come by in the 1930s for everyone, but depending on the line of work, it could be close to impossible. Another determinant of employability was skill. Skill was a large factor in whether or not someone would keep their current job or if they could reasonably seek out other employment. Now, their skill is determined through their previous wages, performance records, and schooling. And schooling or education was important because if someone had more than 8 years of education, they were more likely to stay in their job. Lastly, age was also a determinant of whether gainful employment could be found. Layoff rates declined sharply when workers had seniority at their jobs. In some instances, established employees would bump out unskilled job seekers. Bumping out is a practice where skilled or semi-skilled workers accept unskilled work in order to stay employed. However, men who were over the age of 45 who found themselves unemployed had a number of biases stacked against them when seeking a job. Several reasons were given, such as increased pension costs, difficulty of training, and higher accident rates. But basically, if you were young, unskilled, uneducated, or over the age of 45, you were in trouble. Before the Great Depression, temporary and long-term poverty relief was mostly left up to the state and city governments and local almshouses. Indeed, the government activity only took up 3 to 4% of the GDP. However, the government took on a new role in the 1930s. When Franklin Roosevelt accepted his nomination as the Democratic candidate, he said, I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. The New Deal that President Roosevelt promised had a multifaceted approach to combating joblessness alone, expanding old public works programs, creating new public works programs, supporting art and culture, and making legislation that would establish fair and reasonable working standards. Now, the New Deal contains numerous programs, but I will only be discussing 4 programs. These 4 programs I've chosen either for their popularity, effectiveness, or longevity, because some of these programs still exist today. The first program is the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, and it was established in 1933 by the Federal Emergency Relief Act. This administration sought to respond to the fiscal crisis of state and local governments by acting as a granting agency. It supplied money for state relief work programs, and it gave a significant amount of money over its time to states and helped over 20 million people. The Works Progress Administration was established in 1935 by Executive Order Number 7034 under the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act. The WPA was created to alleviate mass unemployment in the United States, and did so by being one of the largest and most diverse programs in the New Deal. The WPA had projects that built schools, bridges, airports, parks, water lines, and more, and it supported over 8.5 million Americans. The works programs were not the only thing that the New Deal did for unemployed workers. One of the most successful acts was the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act created infrastructure that dictated how companies could treat their workers. It established a minimum wage of 25 cents per hour, a standard 44-hour work week, a requirement to pay for overtime work, and a prohibition on certain types of child labor. Some companies opposed the establishment of this law, but it survived a constitutional challenge in 1941 in the landmark case United States versus Darby. In addition to the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Social Security Act of 1935 was possibly the most successful program from the New Deal. While there was some precedent for this program in veterans' benefits and state welfare programs, there was no federal system for unemployment, disability, or retirement. This law cast a wide net for the people it would assist. It established unemployment benefits, aid for dependent children, child and maternal welfare, aid to the blind, and old age pensions. It was quite successful in alleviating poverty in elderly generations and provided support for millions of Americans throughout the 1930s. Social Security has had a lasting effect for Americans since then. According to the 2019 Annual Statistical Supplement, the Social Security Administration was providing benefits for 63 million Americans. Now, the question is, was the New Deal a success? It depends on who you ask. The answer depends on a variety of factors: what policies are included, which outcomes are being measured, how large the effect must be to be considered a success. It is a treacherous effort to try to define a unified theme for the New Deal, because there were so many objectives, often conflicting, that were being addressed. The New Deal is best seen as a bundle of policies designed to tackle a broad range of specific problems that arose in a severely depressed economy. The one thing that you could say was not a success back then was the tax policy. Now, the tax policy leading up to the Great Depression was made in an effort to make up for government debt from the First World War. Surprisingly, the tax rate did not decrease during the Great Depression. In fact, the Revenue Act of 1935, also known as the wealth tax, raised taxes on wealthy from 59% on incomes over $1 million to 75% on incomes over $500,000. Additionally, this law raised real estate taxes and enacted graduate net income taxes on corporations and incorporated dividends. There were subsequent revenue acts in 1936, 1937, and 1940 that aimed to penalize corporate tax avoidances and broaden the tax base, among other things. The point was to offset government spending and work toward balancing the federal budget. But if you know John Maynard Keynes, and you follow in his intellectual footsteps, you'll know that spending, not taxing, is the way to encourage economic growth. While many of the New Deal policies undertook aggressive deficit spending, like the ones that we had talked about, the tax policy was in direct opposition to this deficit strategy. By taxing the public, Roosevelt was decreasing demands for goods by decreasing the money supply. Now, one way to correct this tax policy is to lower tax rates, but another is to give money directly to taxpayers. And we've seen that recently with President George W. Bush and with the current coronavirus and President Trump. The Economic Stimulus Act of 2008 and the current March 2020 Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Acts have given credits back to taxpayers in order to give the money directly to them so that they can use it on spending in the economy. It's possible that this type of credit would have been welcomed in the Great Depression. The New Deal was an enormous feat of legislation passed in an effort to assuage the difficulties of the greatest economic depression the United States has ever experienced. Some of the laws that were passed in the New Deal were counterintuitive to the goal of escaping economic ruin. But overall, I believe the New Deal was a success. It was innovative in its design, and some of the programs still are successful today. And additionally, a lot of the strategies that were implemented to get the United States out of the Depression are still used in legislation today. I hope that I engaged well with you in this presentation, and I am excited to know of any questions that you have for me. Thank you.